Hi everyone. In this video, I want to introduce and talk about your second major writing project, the community-based argument. So after this first unit where you were looking at the arguments made by others and thinking about how they operate rhetorically, now I want you to move into making your own argument. And so this assignment is designed around talking to, targeting, and engaging with a particular audience with a specific purpose, in this case, to inform your audience about an issue and its complexity, and basically kind of make a case for why they should pay attention to it. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be crafting an argument to attract your audience's attention to this issue and inform them of the complexity and the specific details. In other words, you're looking at something that might seem simple and then really explaining to a reader why it's actually more complex than they might first think. So obviously one of the things you have to do up front is think about who your audience is, who is it you're talking to, because if you know that, then basically that's going to tell you a lot more about what kind of particular information you need to incorporate into your paper, you know, how you're going to argue to either an audience that is unfamiliar with your topic or unaware, or one that is maybe resistant to your point of view or your interpretation of the issue. So once you know your audience and your community, then you've got to think about the research. And so this is kind of taking a step up in terms of the research from the last paper and thinking a little bit more about finding multiple sources, representing different viewpoints in order to give a better, clearer picture to your reader of the issue overall and what's at stake. So you're going to be conducting research for this paper. I'll talk about the source requirement in a bit. But you have your goal here is to inform the audience of this issue and its complex nature. So what that also means is you are not, in this paper, you're not presenting a proposal. So that's actually what you shouldn't be doing. And if you do that, you're going to lose a lot of points. So your goal is to inform, not to convince or persuade. That'll be something we get into in project 3 more. But for this paper, you are thinking about how can you inform and kind of shed light on an issue for an audience. So knowing the audience is pretty important in that case. And then you're going to be thinking about many of the different types of arguments and genres you're going to be looking at and learning about in this unit, such as arguments of fact, definitional arguments, causal arguments, kind of looking at these different genres of arguments, different styles of arguing to an audience, and thinking about what the best approaches might be in order to make a strong case for your reader. So it does, you can maybe in your conclusion, it's okay to make a general call for change and say, hey, we need to do something differently. But I don't want you spending time in the body of the paper saying, here's a course of action, here's a plan and steps to take for that. So ultimately, as it says in the last line of the description of the assignment on the assignment sheet, you want to inform your audience why the issue needs to be addressed and why it exists or persists, and convince them how they should understand or interpret this issue, right? So 1, you're saying, hey, this problem exists. 2, you're saying, here's how you should understand what's happening, what's going on here with this issue. So that's kind of the challenge and the thing you're really going to be working on for this second project. So part of the thing up front is once you know your audience is keeping your topic specific and focused. It's really easy to go broad and go big. And that's a real easy way to kind of lose the interest of your reader and also kind of make it harder for you as a writer and a researcher to really focus in and talk about something specific. So you want to keep it focused. That's why, you know, something like this is the difference between saying like a subject like cyberbullying, which is huge, and an issue or a topic like free speech on Twitter, which is still pretty big in and of itself, but more focused. It's got a particular community, a particular set of guidelines you can look at, that kind of stuff. So you're thinking about looking at a particular, you know, issue in a community. So you want it to really be a topic and not a subject. And that's one of the things I'll be looking for when I look at your and respond to your topic paragraphs, is that you have something that's focused and specific and it's going to work well for the project. So again, you are informing the audience, you know, and you are convincing in the sense that you are explaining why it's worthy of their attention, but you are not persuading, you are not proposing a course of action. So that's something you want to keep in mind. You are going to be using more outside research in this paper, and you're going to be doing it a different way than you did in the first paper. So one of the things you want to keep in mind is you'll have to find multiple outside sources. But the whole argument should be you. It should be your voice. So that's what I'm looking for. What I'm really going to be paying attention to and reading in your argument is this your argument, right? Are these your points? Are these your claims? And then are you using your sources to support those claims, right? Which is a very different thing than finding a bunch of information and just dumping it into a paper, right? So what you want to be doing is, have your points, right? This is what I'm going to look for when you turn in your source list and your outline is what are your points that you're making in this argument, and then what sources do you have to back up your claims, right? How are you going to support your claims with outside information? Since you're going to have multiple outside sources, you are allowed at most, and you mostly shouldn't even do this, but you can, if you feel it's necessary, use one block quote in your paper. So that's in MLA, that is one quote of four or more typed lines in your paper. But be aware that if I look at this quote and it's filler, if you just needed to pad the word count, if it's clear that you don't need most of or all of this quote, I'm going to penalize that. So as with any outside information, one of the things you always want to do and you want to think through is what is important about this information. This is the difference, as you'll learn in this unit a little bit more, between quoting, summarizing, and paraphrasing. Right? Quoting, when you're, is when you take the direct words of somebody else and you cite that directly in your paper. And that's good if you think that the words are so important that they need to be there. But a lot of times the information itself, if you just have a source that's providing a statistic or a fact, or, kind of a key point, and it doesn't matter as much how it's said as what the information actually is, right? And that's an opportunity to paraphrase. If you're looking at a larger chunk of information, you might summarize. So you want to think about varying that up. But in all those cases, you're thinking about, why is this information important? Why does it have to come into my paper? So something to keep in mind when you think about how to bring in those sources. The sources themselves need to be current, so they should be up to date. They should be varied, so you shouldn't have 4 newspaper articles and nothing else. And they should be relevant to your argument. So we should actually see the connection between the sources you found and what you're talking about in your paper. So as it says there at the end of the what to do, what not to do, at no point should your sources be carrying the paper. If an easy way to do this is to kind of look at your paragraphs. And if you notice any more than 1 to 2 sentences in your paragraph is information from an outside source, guess what? That's not you. That's your sources carrying your paper, and that's not you actually making a point. So if you're doing that, you need to go back and think about, how do you make your voice clearer and how do you use your sources as support? So in terms of the source requirement, so you need to have at least 5 outside sources. 5 to 7 is the range for this paper. They should be credible. They can be informative and or persuasive. So, there's a couple of, you kind of opening up your potential sources more. So they should be, as I said, they should be current. So usually you're going to be looking at stuff within the past 1 to 2 years. It does depend a little bit on your topic. You might get a little bit older if you're looking for a longer perspective, things like that. But if you're talking about educational funding in Kansas and you're looking at stuff from 2005, that is useless, basically, beyond providing a historical perspective. So you want to make sure your sources are up to date. They're relevant for your topic. They make sense. So you can, if you have the time, the option, the ability, you can do some primary research. So you might do a questionnaire, a survey, or conduct an interview. If you want to do a survey or questionnaire, one of the key things you need to keep in mind is that you need to have a group of people that it makes sense to circulate this survey to. So if you knew a bunch of Washburn students that lived on campus and you wanted to circulate a survey about the quality of on-campus dining, that would make sense. If you wanted to circulate a survey about views on climate change to the same group, that's not going to work because it's a very limited viewpoint. You would have to have a much more varied survey. So interviews, if you have somebody that works in the field, is knowledgeable about the topic, that's great. You can definitely bring that in. I would always just recommend, if you're thinking about doing any sort of primary research, I would get in touch with me first so we can talk about that a little bit more. So your other sources, for the most part, can be from what we might call more popular, or mainstream sources like magazines, newspapers, websites. But you do want to make sure, again, that they're credible, and that's one of the things I'll be looking for when you submit your source list, is that these sources are good. They work for your paper. That's information you can trust. At least one source needs to be a scholarly article or chapter from a book or journal on your topic. So you need to use the library databases, usually, but not solely. Academic Search Premier or Academic Search Complete is the database to use for that. And but there are other, library databases you can use as well. You're not limited to that one. Or if you find a book in the Maybe Library collection that has a chapter or something you want to use, that's great. Now, when looking for that source, that is the one source that probably won't be as recent, and that's because scholarly publishing takes usually a longer time to get out there. The nice thing is that you have somebody who's an expert in the field, who's been doing a lot of research on something for maybe a year or two before they publish this article. So it gives you a much more in-depth and knowledgeable perspective than maybe a newspaper or magazine article. The trade-off is they aren't always going to be as recent. Right? So you want to keep that in mind. So your scholarly article may not actually be specifically about your topic. So if you're doing, the Kansas budget in 2017, there's probably not a scholarly journal article out there, but there might be one more broadly about states' budgets, looking at particular programs like education, agriculture, things like that. So, so you might have to go and think a little bit more about different types of sources when looking at the academic source. And again, if you have trouble finding those sources, let me know. I'm glad to help out. I can, there are search strategies, some of which I'll kind of get into in this unit that'll help out. So in terms of selecting a topic, you'll notice there are some guidelines there that are pretty important. So some of this I've already gone over. The topic itself obviously needs to be current and ongoing. So this means that if it's no longer relevant, if the issue's already been resolved and we've moved on, then that's something that you can't really deal with. The only, I'd say, I guess, exception to that is if something's been resolved, but you think it was done poorly or the wrong way, or it needs to be revisited, then you can make that argument. But if you're saying, hey, this issue is a problem, but it's actually been fixed, then there's not really an argument there to be made. The topic itself, part of the idea of the community-based argument is that you're going for a specific audience. That needs to be a local or state level in scale. So you shouldn't be looking, even if it's a national or global topic, you're thinking about how it affects a more local or regional type of audience. Now there's a couple of things there, right? The community doesn't just have to be a physical community. So you don't just have to think of like the city of Topeka or the state of Kansas. It can be an organization, right? Maybe the issue is something that affects people at Washburn. It can be about a digital community, like Twitter or Reddit or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways to define community. And if you think you have an angle or a topic you want to get into and you're not sure whether something counts as a community, again, let me know, and I'm glad to kind of help out with that. So you cannot pick any hot button issue, including but not limited to, as the list there says, abortion, capital punishment, gun control, the drinking age, legalizing marijuana, immigration, gay marriage, and teen pregnancy. Why is that? And that is because, guess what? People want to write on these all the time, and I'm not against writing on them. And if you can find, and I have had people who find a particular angle in on this issue that is specific and focused and not just generally about these topics, and that might work. One thing that is, for better or worse, going to happen, I believe in, June, July? I believe July is unless the law changes very quickly, is that guns will be allowed on college campuses in Kansas. So if you were to look at gun control through that particular lens and focus more on the legal issues, the implementation issues, that works. But the reason I tend to kind of propose limit, not maybe an all-out ban on these topics, is because when you write on them generally, there's very little that you're going to say about this topic that hasn't already been said. I know because I've been teaching for over a decade. I've had many students who want to write on these topics, and then 99% of the time they start working on it and they realize how difficult it is to say something new or interesting and not just kind of say, here's what everybody's already said, here's kind of the same old things. So that's why I don't really kind of allow those particular topics. They're also, again, they're still more like subjects than topics. So If you do have an angle on one of those issues that you might think would work for the topic, again, get in touch with me. I'm not, if it works and it makes sense, I'm generally willing to let you work with it. And I do want you to pick something that's going to be interesting to you for this paper. That's one of the key things about each of the writing projects. So the last guideline is that the topic needs to be focused, which I already mentioned in specific. So cyberbullying is broad, free speech on Twitter is more focused. Even that could be narrowed down more, but you want to think about a particular issue that you're looking at for the paper. So again, just as with the rhetorical analysis, you will submit your topic paragraph, and then you won't be able to submit the next element, which I believe is the source list and outline, until I've approved your topic and given you feedback on it. So I'll be looking over those. With this, you should obviously be thinking about who that specific audience is, and that's one of the things you'll want to be identifying in your topic paragraph. You can, look over the outlines, or the outcomes on the assignment sheet. I definitely recommend doing that. The length and format is the same as the first paper, 1,500 to 2,000 words. This excludes all the MLA stuff, works cited page. You will have a longer works cited page, obviously, this time, since you're using more outside sources in this paper. Again, all sources need to be cited both in the body of the paper, so they need to be incorporated into your actual argument, and cited on the works cited page. They need to be in both places. So what I'm looking for in this project, one, that you're able to fully inform your audience about the complexity of the issue. So we should understand why this is a complex problem. Why is it not simple? Why can't we just say, fix this one thing and we're good to go? It should be thoughtfully written and organized to convince your audience. So that's one of the key things about this argument, is how you present this information to your reader. Do you want to start with, your strongest point, your weakest point, your best or worst point? Like, how do you want to present all that to the reader in a way that's going to help convince them and get them invested in the issue? The paper needs to be well researched and supported throughout, so you are finding multiple outside sources. You're thinking about how to use them in your paper effectively. And one of the things you should also do, obviously, is be able to address potential counter arguments or alternative hypotheses, right? So if you're presenting a particular view of the issue, you have to justify why you disagree, or think other people are wrong, or that's not the right way to look at something. So the process work is a little bit different. There's an extra step for this paper. So you'll have your topic paragraph, that's 5% of the grade, and then you'll submit both a combined source list and outline that I'll be looking over. So both the source list will be just kind of a list of the 5 sources you found that you think are going to work for the paper. When we get there, a note too that you'll get feedback from me. You are not locked into those 5 sources, because as is often the case, you might have sources you think work, and then you start writing the paper and realize one of these doesn't work and you need to find another one. That's totally fine. So you're not locked into those sources after you submit the source list. The outline is up to you how structured it is. It's really about kind of creating an outline based on what works for you. But I do want an idea about how you're going to be initially thinking about approaching organizing the paper, what the points are of your argument, things like that. So that's especially where I'm going to be looking at what are your points, and then what is the evidence you have to support your claims. So that's going to be 10% of your grade. Again, you'll be submitting a draft for peer reviews. That's going to be 10% of the grade. And then the final draft breakdown is the same as the first paper, where it's 50% is to that content, 10% is to organization, 10% is to the MLA formatting and the references, and your sources. And I'm going to be looking at that more in depth in this paper, since you're going to be using more outside research. And then 5% again to grammar mechanics. So just like the first paper, you will have your topic paragraph due very early on. I suggest looking at the due dates in the calendar on D2L to get more into that. And then we will have another peer review with the draft, where you'll get feedback from your classmates, and then the final draft that you'll be submitting as well. And you will have, as I mentioned before too, before the draft, you'll be submitting that source list and outline that I'll be getting you feedback on before you start working on the draft. So again, the rubric for the assignments on D2L, I definitely recommend kind of looking at that for more specific expectations. But please, if you have questions about the assignment, if you have questions, especially about topics in particular, I'm glad to talk to you via email, or if you want to set up a time to chat via Zoom and we can talk out a topic a little bit more, anything like that, or you have trouble finding sources, anything like that, please let me know. And I want to reiterate again that I do want you to find a topic that you're interested in, you want to write on, because that always tends to be a better paper if you're interested and invested in the issue. So if you have something you think you might want to work on, and you're not sure how to approach it, let me know, and we can see if we can find an angle. So otherwise, I look forward to seeing what you all come up with on your topics for this next paper, and especially what you come up with in the papers themselves. They're always tend to be interesting and relevant, and I always learn something, so I'm excited to kind of see what you come up with. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, good luck on this next unit.